We're now live on YouTube with the August 28th, 2019 meeting of the Node.js modules team. We have got a set of 10 people on the call right now. That's exciting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of which. Wes, is it just you or is Daniel with you today?
Tis just I. Daniel is busy.
I'm heartbroken, but we'll survive. So we've got we've got 8 active members on the call and 2 observers. Thank you all for making time out of your day. We've got a full agenda, so we're going to jump right in. Before we start, does anyone have any announcements to make? Okay, that's a no. So the first thing that we have on the agenda is number 371, which is divergent specifier hazard. This is an issue that was opened by Jeffrey Booth. Jeff, would you like to take this one?
Sure. So when I was working on the attempt to try to get dual packages, and to be clear, what I mean by that is like the same package that contains both ESM and CommonJS sources, being able to do require package as well as import package, and it works in both cases. And how it works is up for debate, and there's many approaches for that. But as in, the user wouldn't have to write, like our current solution that's in the docs is the user has to write, say, require package and then import package / module.mjs, or import package and then require module / common.js, or something like that, or package / common.js. So the idea was to not have this like divergent, like these 2 specifiers. So Miles pointed out in the discussion about that, hey, if we have one specifier mean 2 different things in the 2 module systems, this can cause chaos. And it actually has already come up once with the GraphQL project when they started to try to adopt MJS under the previous Node 7 through 11 version of experimental models. I didn't fully understand the issue, so I dug into it a bit and tried to like come up with like a minimal repro of what the issue was so that I can kind of get a grasp on it. And my sense was that this isn't just a dual package thing. It would also apply to extension searching. If you had file.mjs and file.js and you just did like, /file or import /file, require /file, resolve the 2 separate things in 2 separate module systems, it's basically the same issue. So as I tried to break it down on that issue, we basically have 3 options. One, status quo, like what's there now is what we ship with when we unflag. And we would probably get rid of the flag that lets you opt into the automatic extension resolution. Option 2, be like, there's a hazard, but I don't care. We write about it in the docs and advise users how to avoid it, but then it's just on the users to not have this problem. Or option 3, come up with some clever technical solution to avoid the problem. And the only one that anyone, at least on the thread, thought of was having require be able to import ESM. So if I published this package that has both CommonJS and ESM sources in Node 12, import package, require package would both times pull the ESM sources. And so therefore, there is no issue. And there's a lot of issues separately, though, with getting require VSM to work. And there doesn't seem to be much progress being made on that. So I think that's a fair enough introduction. I don't want to keep droning on if people want to talk.
Jordan has their hand up.
Yeah, so basically, the hazard you're describing is one that has always existed in NPM. not just because of extension searching, but also because of package duplication, which is a normal and necessary thing in a mature package manager. So the solution to this, widely known but perhaps long misunderstood solution to this is peer dependencies, and anything that's stateful or a singleton needs to be a peer dependency so that you only have one copy in the tree. This is not something that can be fixed by leaving things as they are. This is not something that can be avoided, and other than the solution I mentioned. And if you use that solution, then extension searching and dual packages offer no additional hazards. So for me, I have not yet seen any explanation or any example of a case that differs from that. So to me, this hazard is not a hazard that this introduces, and so it should not be relevant to discussing dual packages or extension searching. It remains the universal truth that if you have a stateful thing, you have to ensure there's only one copy of it. And my understanding of the GraphQL issue you mentioned was that they had two copies of it, one in CJS and one in ESM. And that's the same thing that would happen with duplicate packages.
We have Jan and then Wes, and then I would like to say something. And then to stop for a second, I do believe that we now have quorum on the call. We're up to 12 people, 10 of whom are active members. So after this agenda item, I'd like to go through the pull requests and just quickly review and approve the new people who wanted to be added as observers. Jan, you had something to add?
Yeah, I think it's skipping over some finer details to say that this is nothing new. It's definitely new that peer dependencies cannot save you from this, assuming that people are publishing packages that have both, which is the only scenario where this is actually a thing, right? It's now new that even if you have only a single copy of a package, because dynamic extension resolution applies, you might now find two different copies of the same implementation within that same package. So there are ways to address it by explicitly having specific files not be duplicated within that package, but it's definitely new. Like the fact that you have to design your package specifically so that your transpiled sources are not 100% copies of each other, but that you only transpile parts of the package and parts of the package need to be manually maintained is something that the ecosystem is definitely not used to.
Wes?
Yeah, that's fair. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to.
I'm going to go backwards in time with the things I want to respond to here. Specifically, I do agree with Jordan that the hazard does already exist, but I also agree with the fact that the real problem isn't the fact that the hazard already exists. Yes, the hazard already exists and people know how to work around it. It's by having separate packages that you only include one copy of by peer dependencies. Correct. However, the current modern tooling and recommended practices for working with ESM and transpiled copies of ESM are to ship them side by side in the same package, which is where we run into the problem. And changing everybody's views on that is a monumental task.
So that shouldn't necessarily be taken lightly. It's simply that current patterns for that invite problems. Going back even further to what Jeffrey was saying, the third interesting technical solution isn't actually that interesting. We don't actually need full require of ESM. That is an enhancement. All you need to be able to say is that the CJS, or all you need to be able to say is that the ESM resolver is a strict subset of the CJS resolver. It's all that's needed. All that means is the CJS resolver will do everything like the ESM resolver would do, i.e. look up exact files and all that jazz, and will load files with the same priority that the ESM resolver does, using the same flags the ESM resolver does. That way, if the result turns out to be something that should be loaded as an ESM file, the CJS resolver can simply say no and throw, because it knows it should not do that. That's all. You don't actually need to be able to resolve it to an object or do anything with it. You just need to be able to know that you should not load the thing. Actually loading it would be a nice enhancement on top of that, but it's not actually the part that fixes the problem.
Jan, if you have a direct response, you can go first.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify what West was just saying. So I'm assuming that this implies that, for example, ESM would either never apply .mjs, or if it would do it with a lower priority than all the existing things, including everything as in required extensions. Because otherwise, it could never actually do it without stopping to be a subset of the CJS resolution.
So like the idea there is the ESM resolver today, in fact, sees MJS as like, you have to include the exact extensions. So there is no priority system right now at all. And then the follow-up to that is, yes, if there is extension searching, the priority in ESM needs to be the same as in CJS. However, that priority is free to be modified in both at the same time by something like the type module field, which can easily be recognized by both.
Jan, do you have a response or no?
No, just forgot to lower my hand.
So I guess kind of like stepping back for a second and thinking about what we're talking about here, what we want to accomplish and why we're bringing this up. I believe that the reason why Jeff brought this up was to try to bring more evidence towards why we don't want to turn extension resolution on by default. We have other reasons as well, but like not having it on by default does protect against this hazard. I think that, to Jordan's point, yes, this hazard to a certain extent already exists in the ecosystem. It's part of the reason why NPM started flattening dependencies in newer versions of NPM for front-end applications, specifically to minimize where this hazard would hit. And in my own personal experience, when this hazard does hit, it hits in ways that are not very intuitive. It hits in ways that break in very mysterious ways. And in order to understand exactly what is happening requires a somewhat sophisticated understanding of the module loading algorithm. So while I recognize that this hazard exists and that things like peer dependencies, and I know NPM 7 is looking at introducing new ways of handling peer dependencies, can help solve it, I don't find that personally a compelling reason for us not to try to minimize the hazard in our own runtime. I think that, we've pointed at this hazard as one of the reasons for not having file extension resolution, compatibility with import name maps being another. But I am personally, not left. I guess stepping back, the intention of opening this issue, I think, was to maybe close the discussion around whether or not we were going to turn extension resolution on by default. That is the reason why we're discussing it. If we want to discuss other like major changes to how we do things, then that should maybe be its own discussion. But
Could I just amend that slightly, Miles?
Yeah.
It was actually to close the discussion around dual packages. But extension searching is kind of a side effect. But yeah.
Okay. So to more accurately then say it, Jeff, and let me know if I'm wrong. You would like to remove dual packages as what, or at least like, I guess it would transparent dual packages where someone can import the same specifier and it can be both CJS or ESM. You would like to remove that as one of the cases that we're trying to solve for with our implementation. Is that accurate?
Oh, yeah. Well, right now it's under phase 3. It would get moved down under the like tabled area of phase 3, as in we're not going to pursue this any further. I think at the moment, it seems to me the only way to avoid that happening would be the require VSM solution, but there's no PR for that. It doesn't seem to be making progress. So I guess we could table it, and then if that PR comes up in a month, 2 months, even after we unflag, it could be revived. But yeah.
So Wes, you're up, and it seems like you have something to say. Would you like to?
All right. So first of all, extension resolution, while it increases the surface area of this hazard, is not the only way this hazard surfaces. Like, extension resolution means that, yes, with relative imports, you can have two different things that if the two resolvers behave differently, return different things. But anywhere the resolvers do things differently, i.e. in the interpretation of package JSON flags, the problem occurs. The two resolvers should not be two resolvers. They need to be one resolver that just does different things with the resolution result. Like, the fact that they're different is the core of the problem. And as I keep saying, we don't actually need to be able to execute ESM to fix the problem. Like, we just need to be able to guarantee that the one resolver always behaves as a subset of the other. That's all. We've made this harder on ourselves by implementing the ESM resolver in C++, thinking that was a good idea from the start, because we've been trying to isolate these two module systems, because apparently having two module systems is way better than having one. But like, if we were willing to just go back on that for a moment and say, okay, let's try and actually just have one module system that behaves as the ESM module system, but can also behave as the CJS module system when it needs to, and like has one unified resolution code path for the two of them, that would actually entirely solve this problem, because then we'd be able to say, well, both resolvers know about the type module field, both resolvers know how extension priority resolution works, and one resolver simply says, since this was found via extension searching, I'm not going to use any of these results and will throw. And whereas the other resolver says, seems good, it's a CJS file, it's fine. Like, there's nothing to do with actually loading any code that is required to fix this. It's entirely resolver behavior.
Okay, Jordan, you have your hand up, and then I'm just going to look at the agenda very quickly. We do have quite a few other things. We have 4 other agenda items, so I think that we should maybe time box this to another 10 minutes. Jordan?
Sure, I'll be as brief as I can. So although I have many feelings about dual packages and extension searching, and I've made them clear, I think, in the past, that's not, those are implementations that I think solve problems. The thing that I think is really critical that I don't think we can or should table before unflagging is solving the problem of how I publish a module that can work at least across node versions, meaning across the barrier between supports ESM unflagged and does not. I think that is far too critical to table. So if dual packages and extension searching isn't the answer, fine. Let's find another one, but I don't think we can avoid finding an answer. And +1 to everything Wes said about the resolvers as well.
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
Jordan, does the status quo, like what we've described in the docs about, import package / module MJS, does that not solve
anything that requires
problem
reading English is completely unacceptable. People do not enough people read documentation, not enough people speak English. Like it's fine if like there's no other option, then putting a caveat in the docs is of course the only option. But anything that requires me to write prose to explain it is just a massive failure, in my opinion, in providing like compatibility and interoperability.
Jan?
Maybe I should also unmute. So one thing that confused me about the comment by Wes is saying that the ESM resolver should be a subset of the JS resolver, which, as far as I can tell, that is the case right now. Like, at least that's the design goal. If it isn't, that I would consider that the bug.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying as well. Like, it is a bug right now that it is not, and it's
well. So no. I'm saying if there is anything about it that is currently not a subset, that would be a bug, because the intention of the implementation right now is that it is a subset. If there is any divergence in that, that would be a bug, and we should fix that. Now, shared implementation might potentially help guaranteeing that. But given my attempts of even sharing parts of the implementation and getting the if conditions and the flow right, I'm not sure the resulting code would be something that is maintainable. because implementing a subset of the CommonJS resolver inside of the highly optimized code of the CommonJS resolver is hard. And it will make future maintenance a lot harder. So I would be in favor of having a strong acceptance test suite. I'm not sure I would be in favor of actually trying to jam it both into the same code base.
I mean, it's mostly a matter of like the so like we added exports to both, so that's good. We've gotten that correct, but like the CJS resolver still doesn't understand type module, and that's a failing right there, because that means
right. That's a bug.
Yes, and that's the big one in the current implementation.
Right, but what I'm arguing here,
and then like
after that fact is established, or that the agreement is established that we both want ESM to be a subset of CommonJS resolution.
Right,
I don't think there is wide disagreement. What I'm saying here is, though, that with that in place, that means that we don't have diversion specifiers, which is basically option 1.
Well, I mean, like my then follow up to that is like, once we have that in place and we've agreed that that's the premise, like extension searching can be added to ESM with no problem, because that's still a subset of CJS, and the CJS and the ESM resolver are going to resolve to the same extension in the end anyway.
Right, so, but we would lose one of the major advantages of having extension resolution, which was the divergence. Without it, we just make it we make it harder to have web compatible code without gaining any new actual capabilities.
Well, I mean, I think like the reason that I continue to walk down that path is because like we can do incremental improvement in that direction, because like if we start today with saying the one resolver is a subset of the other, that way we don't have the divergent specifier hazard. We can say tomorrow we add extension resolution, then we can say the day after that we can now load ESM in CJS, because that's, as I've been saying, likely very possible. Like that is a very incremental path to get to better and better places.
I think the point Jan's trying to say is that the concept of extension searching doesn't really carry into that argument at all. It doesn't really change the argument.
I mean, yeah, I'm just trying to bring up the fact that like the divergent specifier hazard, air quotes, is not a reason not to do extension searching. Because like even with extension searching, you can still not have divergent specifiers. That's what
right. The argument here is, though, that extension searching, like this is about a very specific kind of extension searching, and that is the kind that would prioritize MJS over one of the known extensions, and that is basically completely ruled out, at least for all existing code.
I mean, yeah, that's why we have the type module field, so you can opt in to the different priority order. That's exactly why that field exists, because we do not treat MJS as higher priority than JS right now.
We don't handle MJS in extension searching, or maybe we do.
We do. We have an error for it.
It's lower priority than other extensions.
So Wes, I guess what you're saying, and then this would be the bug, would be the order at which we do extension searching for ESM and CommonJS is a different order. It should be the same order, and the order should only switch when you do type.module. That way, if in both CommonJS and in ESM, if you wouldn't be able to do the trick that people do where they drop the extension and then all of a sudden now without an extension, it resolves .js first and then resolves .mjs first, depending on which loader you're in.
Yes, correct.
Exactly. So it would mean that we would drop all extensions. Well, it would mean that we either need to support every single required.extensions object key, or
the ESM resolver doesn't need to worry about that, because it's not going to resolve any extensions right now. When it does start resolving extensions, I imagine you would want to read the required.extensions keys, because people have put those in there and want them to actually work. Like, and just a list of string keys, I don't think is that bad. I mean, if you're going to do the extension searching, you should probably search for all the extensions people asked for.
Right, but one of the things that is longstanding is that we are trying to get rid of required.extensions. This would mean that the new resolution would have to support required.extensions. It could not choose to be a subset that doesn't support required.extensions.
I mean, I think you would want to have that conversation about removing required.extensions on its own right. without trying to shoehorn it into, system that needs to be heavily interoperable with the existing system.
Yeah, just a quick point of order. I'd like to time box this to 3 more minutes. Wes, thanks for being patient, by the way, because I think I now understand exactly what you were trying to point out there.
Yeah.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, I would just say, like, what I find frustrating is that, like, I feel like, Wes, require a VSM is a potential technical solution to this, but it seems like you're only interested in it in pursuing it in the sake of making automatic extensions work in ESM. And there are plenty of other reasons why many people here wouldn't want to enable that. So it's like we could solve the problem for dual packages and get dual packages to work.
Jeffrey, this is why
require VSM.
This is why I'm trying to say that the divergent specifier has a problem and requiring ESM are 2 separate problems.
Yeah.
Entirely separately. That's entirely what I am saying here.
I think what Wes is saying is that the solution to this problem would just be an update to our current flag for file extension resolution and changing the order for it. And it's a separate thing altogether from require ESM. Is that accurate, Wes?
Absolutely accurate, yes.
And if we land that one change, then there's other reasons why we may not want extension resolution, but it removes the hazard that extension resolution would create with the dual mains. It would also remove the ability to preclude the extension and have dual packages through that method. Like, it actually would remove that whole behavior.
Mm-hmm. And specifically that if you were to try and load an ES module from CommonJS, you would get an error in all cases that you would.
That would preclude dual module system packages in a ESM supporting Node version. That would not preclude, I believe, a package that worked in both a pre-module and post-module Node version. Right. There's 2 kinds of dual packages. So
what this would mean is that if your main was a file with no extension and you required it and you imported it, and there was a .js file and you are not a type.module, that .js file would be the first one that would be resolved in both loaders, and you would get the CommonJS module in either case. Yep. That would be the eventual thing. Because what we did, and what Wes is pointing out and saying is a bug, is that we look for MJS first before we look for JS in the file resolution searching inside of our implementation in ESM. And if we just change that so the order was the same, even if we didn't support require.extensions, it would still solve for that case, unless people did some really weird funky stuff. But it just independent of that, I guess what Wes is saying, and maybe Wes, we should go through and just tweak that anyways for the implementation that's behind the flag.
Yep.
But it just makes it a non-issue in the discussion. It also means that file extension resolution should no longer be thought of as like a reason for file extension resolution. Dual packages is they're 2 separate things now altogether.
Yeah, I mean, isn't what we're talking about only relevant if extensions become optional in ESM? The order in which the extensions are searched doesn't matter in ESM right now because they aren't being searched.
As I said earlier, the problem still exists today, even without extension searching, because of the type module field, which also causes a difference between the resolvers. And
so can we please explicitly note that .js files loaded under type module need to throw in CommonJS?
Is that not the case right now?
The CSS resolver doesn't recognize the type module field at all, so I would assume it's not.
Okay, so then I think the action items from this, and then maybe we should move on, is that we need to get type.module support in the CJS loader, and we need to have fix the ordering inside of the flagged implementation, and we can revisit any of the discussion about file extension resolution then becomes extremely scoped to file extension resolution, and anything that has to do with dual modules will be specifically about that. And that would be maybe something more and Jordan, I think the solution that the export maps proposal has talked about would maybe do this, whereby you can have a main, and you can have a main in your exports map. If you're in a version of Node that understands export maps, then it always uses the main in the exports map. But if you're in a version of Node that doesn't understand it, it uses the other main. Like that's an example of a dual mode module that has backward support, but it's not one that could like resolve to two different specifiers in the same runtime.
And it would not work in CommonJS in modern Node. So it would say, if you want to use it in modern Node and use CommonJS, it would break, which is kind of problematic, but it's a different problem.
I assume the idea is it would throw because you would use the exports map, you would find an ES module and be like, huh, can't use that.
Right, but it would block you from upgrading your Node version unless you rewrite your app and using import syntax, which
No,
yeah, and like that entire upgrade process is so bad right now because of the fact that like you have to then use dynamic import and introduce awaits everywhere and do a bunch of other garbage. Like the upgrade path, completely garbage right now. That's one of the reasons why I think we really need like a synchronous require of ESM, but I consider that separate.
Yeah. I also think, Wes, for what it's worth, and it would be something we're sitting down, I think that a synchronous require is something that we can maybe target for Node 14. And I think that maybe that is something that we should sit down and maybe try to create like a separate roadmap to as a incremented enhancement. Because I just still don't know how we could do that in 12 without breaking changes, especially as we get close to LTS. Like even small behavior changes start becoming an issue.
I think it's like by the same way that we have to go and patch the resolver to like we already patched it to throw for .mjs, and like we have to patch it to do the correct thing for the type module field. All of those cases are just making things into things that throw right now. The idea being like if we had a synchronous require, we would just make those not throw. So.
Can I just get back to the original issue? Like,
yeah.
Aside from all these other bugs that we should fix, certainly, I mean, are we in a place where we could choose one of the three options? And then, it doesn't sound like we're going to do anything further for dual packages for before we unflag, right? So should we just move it as tabled and say this is the reason why?
I mean, I just said that I think that we can unflag if we have tabled that. So no, I don't think we should do that.
Well, I don't see any other solutions. There are no solutions on the table for how we can solve this.
Everyone in the discussion agreed on option 1 effectively, which is there is no divergence specifier. When you resolve the same thing in both systems, it has to throw in one of them or do the same thing.
So I think that where we're at right now, it seems to me that we're at an impasse. Also, Jordan, the unflagging and the being stable are two different things.
I know, but as we talked about in the last meeting, I don't, for a module system, I don't think they are, because we can mark it as experimental all we want, but if people can use it by default, they will depend on it, and we will, I suspect, rapidly find ourselves unable to make any changes.
So do you have like, especially since we just came up with the fact that we want to make the two resolvers have the same order, which means if we do that, you will no longer, even with extension searching turned on, be able to use the main for a dual package. Do you have an alternative proposal for dual packages?
So off the top of my head right now, no, I certainly don't. But what I would like to see from myself or someone else in order to unflag is just an explanation of how, whether it requires changes or not, of how I can write a package. Assuming, let's say we unflag in Node 12 LTS, write a package that works, in 12 non-LTS, 8, and 12 LTS. And if that exists, then so be it. Even if that, like, I would say there's two tiers there. One is the thing I just said, and the other is that works with require in Node 12 LTS as well, so that you don't have to use await import, or like rewrite your app. If someone can, and I'll certainly try and think about it and put in the time as I have it. But if someone can come up with a path to doing that, then like that's great. I like I tried to imply earlier, like I'm not actually attached to dual mode packages or extension searching. It's just that in my head, those were the only ways to achieve it, to achieve the actual important goal.
Well, I think the only solution we have on offer right now is what's already in the docs of the /module.mjs. So yeah, I understand that has its disadvantages, but it's at least an option.
And with export maps, you could do /JS or /CJS /ESM without having to have the extensions because the export maps can resolve.
Yeah, but it still means that people have to write different specifiers based on how they're using it. And the only way to know what those are is to read my prose in my
But they need to read the
documentation.
README anyway to know what you're exporting. Are they gonna? They're not just gonna guess like
No, they
import
can
something
absolutely
from
just
package.
look at it in the REPL. I'll rarely read READMEs. I require modules and see what they've got in the in the REPL.
I agree with Jordan that we need to have a migration story because we also know already that the compilation story doesn't work for intermediate packages. Because if you write code once, you're trying to compile it to modern syntax or, well, legacy syntax, and you publish the both of the versions, your specifiers will not be modified, at least not with current tooling. So if your dependency has two implementations and you need to modify the specifiers while compiling, it's something that's just not solved yet. So I agree that we need some sort of guidance on how to write a package, especially an intermediate package that has both versions and depends on something that also has the two versions. And the guidance can be, well, you can never use the ESM version of your dependency as an intermediate package, but we need to actually write that out.
All right, so should we maybe update the roadmap to say we're going to write out a whatever migration path for something, and then I don't know if we keep dual packages still on phase 3 or if we table it in favor of the documentation.
I mean, the tabling discussion should happen after we have that documentation, so we can all evaluate it at our own time and not on the spot.
Okay, I think that we need to move on to the next thing. We've run over by quite a bit. The one bit that I do want to say, though, in general about like the concept of blocking, I think that in general, if we're talking about like blocking stuff, I don't think that it's reasonable to block on flagging without a proposed implementation or a proposed solution. Otherwise, we're just in a holding pattern.
Well, sure, but the people have blocked unflagging with extension resolution and ESM by default as well. So that's the exact same thing. There's unacceptabilities all over the place from literally everyone on the call. So like,
yeah, but those came with specific PRs that landed in the state that would allow it to move forward, not an unknown state of what a solution could be. I see those as different things. Quickly before we go, we have a couple people that wanted to be added as observers, and we have the people on the call for this. There's an open issue, a pull request from Brian Clark, from Alex Abishan, and from Bob Evans. Does anyone object to adding any of these individuals as observers? Okay, so I will move forward and add all of them to the repo. Thank you. Jordan, maybe we can spin up. I think that I'm hearing like two separate kind of out-of-band conversations that we can have. One around potential top-level await in CJS and a move forward for either require ESM or await dynamic import in CJS. The second one that I'm hearing is some sort of work around documentation for how we move modules forward. Back to the agenda.
Go ahead.
That we have here. We have revisit .main and exports field, which is actually, I think, very relevant to this conversation because we were just talking about it briefly. Jan, do you want to talk about this?
Right. So originally in the exports proposal, there was a way to also specify main using .main. So in exports, you could have a property dot, and you put in a specifier just like you would in the main field. And it was a way to basically drop using main and just use one field for both. In the very first version, there was even a shorthand that if you set exports to a string, it would implicitly set the main field and exports to false. So you're only exporting that one thing that is in the string. We dropped that because of the dual package thing, because at that point, exports was slated just for ESM. And we also dropped it because .main happened to be somewhat contentious as a syntax because people objected to having an object key that is just a dot. But now that we have additional syntax and exports, like for example, the array fallback syntax, with some additional thoughts about what kind of features it might support, we basically come to a choice between two semi-bad options. Option one being we bring it back, we say exports can override main completely, both for CommonJS and ESM. If you have a dot field in your exports, it overrides the main field. Or the alternative is we could support that same array syntax in main, but that would mean that if you want to use fallbacks for your main export, you would need to drop support for all versions and bundlers before export was introduced. I think that's the rough overview. And my current thinking is that it is less disruptive to support .main, to say exports dot can be set, and if it is set, it completely overrides whatever was in main on all versions of Node that support exports, both for CommonJS and for ESM.
Jan, Guy has their hand up, and then I'll chip in after.
I just wanted to pull out and say that there is a third option, which would be to create a new main field and go back on that bike shed, which would then, of course, as we've just been discussing, need to be supported in both CommonJS and ESM. Yeah, so a third option.
So some thoughts here. Jan, I would like it if you could dig a little bit more into like the fallback support here. Now, just as a quick question, the array syntax fallback support, is this already supported in the current exports proposal, or is this another addition?
It is already implemented in Node. It is supported. Right now, we are just basically the fallback logic is take the first thing that we understand, that is a string that is a URL.
Mm-hmm.
So the current implementation already supports it. And if we want to add fallback support at any time in the future, we kind of have to support it right now, because otherwise we kind of, it would go against the whole purpose of having a fallback syntax, which is that older versions will fall back to some kind of common denominator value.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so like you can kind of just think about that similar to extension searching, but instead of searching across extensions, it goes through each one of the items in the array. If it goes through the array, then it fails.
Yeah, I would think about it like, so the three main use cases for me are replacing different builds. So for example, right now in CommonJS, if you have a development and a production build, your entry point has an if condition and you require one or the other, something that doesn't work in ESM. With this, you can express it somewhat declaratively, so we could support something like development builds with this. It also could replace things like the browser field and various replacements that have been suggested for it. So you could have builds for browser or override entry points for a specific environment, like for Electron. So those are, and also, right, polyfills for built-ins, that's how the browser is using it. So it's kind of modeled after the import map array syntax, which is basically doing the same thing. So in import maps, if you want to polyfill standard key value storage, you put the standard specifier first in the array. So an environment that would support the standard specifier would use it. And then you put the polyfill as a second item So all the other runtimes would then use the polyfill instead. And you can just import the normal specifier in your code, and it will automatically pick the polyfill as necessary.
So a question for you, kind of back to the hazard that we were talking about the last time, and this is just for the export maps as a whole, not just the main. But if we have an array, and the first item in the array is an ES module, and the second item in the array is, oh no, if the first item is an ES module and the second item is a common JS module, and you have, you know, kind of two different parts in your tree, one imports that specifier, then it imports a CJS file. Then that CJS file requires the same specifier.
Yeah,
it not introduce the same hazard that we've been talking about?
No, because it wouldn't. When I say it supports the URL, I mean really the URL. Like if it's a valid URL, it will take it. If it then, if the file doesn't even exist, it will throw because the file didn't exist.
Okay, so it only fails. It doesn't fail if it fails to load. It fails if it's not a valid URL or it doesn't exist on the system.
Yeah.
So the only modules that actually check if it exists, browser at the moment for import maps are the standard modules. And we could do something similar in Node where only the standard modules go through the existence check and everything else is just if it resolves.
Okay, perfect. That actually answers the question that I cared about, which was that whether or not main here could be used for dual modules, but it sounds like the answer is no, which is good. Because you wouldn't be able to like have one that like have a ESM module, then a CJS module and have it fail. It will just fail in the require loader because it will get that proper URL and then try to load it.
Yeah, resolution is 100% reliable in this, or repeatable.
Okay. And I like the idea of this, especially where like essentially we would be not deprecating, but like it shadows it. So if you have a main in the exports and you're in a version of Node that supports exports, then that's what's used. And then that allows main itself to be like a backwards compat hook, essentially.
Yeah.
Which also means that like West, to kind of what you were asking about and to what Jordan was asking about, like this could be the solution that we talk about. Like if you're an ES module and you have a package and you want to have support for older versions of Node that didn't support ESM, you very well could transpile like an ES3 or an ES5 source text from your module, put that in the main, and then any older version of Node will be able to use it.
Yeah, the danger here is what I mentioned earlier, which is you can have a package in your dependencies that works perfectly fine on Node 12 or current Node 12 or Node 10 or whatever version you were on previously. Then you upgrade to a version of Node that supports modules, and now suddenly your application breaks because you're using require to get to that module, but you're on a version of Node that suddenly supports exports. And that is a slight, like that is where it becomes actually dangerous to have these two fields, because you might be preventing successful Node version upgrades because dependencies use this pattern.
I guess, yeah. I'll chew on that. I think we should move on if we want to try to get to anything else for right now.
Can we just get the temperature here on you know what people are thinking between the dot main, just you know the various options here. I just feel like it's been us chatting. I didn't really get much input out of this. I was hoping that maybe there'd be a few more opinions. Please throw opinions.
Well, since we only have 3 minutes left, we can spend the rest of the time on this. Does anyone from the team have any concerns about this? if a PR was to be opened upstream, would people have problems? Jeremiah, you just pasted in the chat that you're thinking it's too complicated. Can you chime in? Oh, the discussion.
I think the discussion is too complicated. I'm having a really hard.
I think it would be a great feature to support. I do share Jan's concern about how do we make the upgrade process seamless, but it just opens up so many doors in terms of like being able to have the main point to different things in different environments and so on. That's a huge win that we know users have been wanting for years and years with the browser field and the Electron field and so on and so forth. So I'd love to try to make it work if we can figure out how to avoid the pitfalls.
Is anyone explicitly against the .main?
Doesn't sound like it. And I mean, thinking about the pitfalls that you were mentioning, Jan, it seems to me like the kind of thing that can be solved through best practices. You know, like if you're going to have both a main and an export dot, maybe you have the main console log a warning or have some sort of warning of like, hey, you're using a legacy interface. So that seems like the kind of thing that can be solved through like best practices in education.
Yeah, I mean, the solution for that user would just be to downgrade their version to the version before you added the exports fields. You know, like this is only really if someone has upgraded their dependency to a version after you've added that, but they're still using an old node, etc.
Yeah, but I guess like where it gets hard, I guess like the other thing that we could introduce too as a possibility here would be like mode legacy that ignores exports and just looks at mains.
Yeah, I mean, it could just be even a -- no exports flag for node.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because like if they're in a position where they need to opt out, it's probably a whole opt out, not just on a per module basis, right? Like they need it to run as if exports doesn't exist. So like I think that if we have an opt out, that should actually be sufficient to solve this problem.
I have faith we can find a solution. We don't need to do it in the next minute.
No, we have a minute.
Can I just throw it out there that I think it could be worthwhile bike shedding a name for it as a new main going forward. I know it's an awful discussion to reopen, but it might be worth considering.
Yeah, I think there's a valuable bike shed to be had about the key and or where to put it. I think it's functionally the same to put it into exports dot or put it into a new top level field. I think I'm kind of liking the idea of supporting the string syntax for exports again, where you can set export itself to a string or an array. In which case a second top level field might be awkward.
I like the idea of having the string because then it acts as both the top level field and something that you can expand upon if you want. And it could also significantly simplify it if people don't need, you know, anything more than the main. Maybe we should punt this back to the issue. We are out of time. I would like to also propose that perhaps we find time for an out-of-band meeting next week. I will be out the following week because of TPAC, but also just we got through like half the agenda. So I think it would be good maybe to follow up on stuff and not have 2 weeks in between. So I'll do that offline. Does anyone else have any thoughts, concerns, grievances, announcements? Cool. Stopping the stream. Thanks for tuning in.